All right. Welcome to the Too Much to Say podcast, where we have too much to say. We are live Tuesday night, 8:30 p.m. on twitch.tv/HectorMeow. And we are ready for episode 15. We're going to be talking about modern board gaming. But first, we got to hop into the weekly random. And I'm going to be honest, this week there was just too much stuff. So if you're interested about any of the stuff that I'm not going to cover here, just go ahead and follow me at Real Sam Shannon on Twitter, where I kind of fill in as the week goes on, because this week has been action packed, not necessarily in a good way, but a bunch of stuff going down this week. And I actually want to cover just talk about kind of go backwards on our story you talked about last week, where I had reported that the 12 soccer players had been rescued. They had actually been found last Tuesday, and we spent this entire week until actually today when they actually were rescued. Through a lot of heroics, they spent basically a couple weeks underneath the ground in the caves, and fortunately there was only one casualty, but that casualty was Sergeant Suman Kunan, formerly of the Thailand SEALs. He was one of the people trying to come save them, and he passed away in his efforts. And if you followed us on any of the podcasts, we respect that. And it's Sergeant Suman Kunan. He deserves to have his name sent. So, but we're glad it was only one casualty. All 12 boys in there, all 12 boys and the coach were rescued, and no other rescuers were harmed in the process. But so that one did actually come to a close this week. But now I guess we'll stay international for the next one. And this is another positive, I guess. In some ways, it's positive and negative, I guess. It's positive because Australia is very dedicated to having their children vaccinated. It's negative because they feel like they have to do this because people in their country aren't vaccinating. But they, as reported by Independent in UK, they are going to issue monthly fines to parents who do not vaccinate their children. It'll be a $28 Australian dollar fine or more if you make more than $29,000 a year, and that's only $21,000 USD, so not very much money. If you make more than that, it's going to be more than $80 a day for every day that you don't have your child vaccinated. And like I said, it's a positive thing because vaccines save lives. I definitely recommend we actually what episode was that? Hold on. Man, it's been a while now. We're getting this is episode 15? That's 15 weeks. I definitely recommend going back. Let's see here. Oh, episode 7. So this was back in May. We did a Convince Me I'm Wrong vaccines, where we talk about whether or not vaccines, cause autism, whether or not you should get your children vaccinated, that sort of thing. And we had one person coming at it from an anti-vaxxer perspective, and then myself, coming at it from pro-vaccine. And if you haven't caught that, I definitely recommend checking it out. I mean, there's a lot of good stuff in the past as well. I mean, we've got starting back at the beginning, political climate. We talk about social media. We talk about our unpopular opinions. The song "This Is America." The value of truth, the cost of truth. What would it take to change your opinion? I mean, go back. Definitely go back. If you like today's episode, I definitely recommend going back and listening to some of the other ones. There's some really good content back there. But anyway, moving on. So, like I said, that's a positive. It's positive. I mean, anything we can do to help save lives. I mean, vaccines are such an easy solution to saving lives. Polio doesn't have to exist anymore. So it's a great thing. All right. All right. We got 3 Trump stories. Trying to think of the best way to go about this. All right. Let's just start right here. Then this has been reported by multiple outlets, but the story I'm citing here is Business Insider. Trump reportedly treats Putin like a confidant. This is, Putin of Russia. As a confidant, and the 2 men commiserate about how the fake news and deep state are against them. President Donald Trump treats Russian President Vladimir Putin as a confidant while bullying and ignoring other world leaders. Let's stop to appreciate that for a second. The President of the United States, a democracy, treats essentially a dictator who is only in title alone a president as his confidant. He's basically the world leader who he is closest to. Not Britain, not France, not our typical allies, not Germany where we're all fighting together to fight against Russia. No. He's buddy with Putin. I wonder why that is. I wonder if it has anything to do with how Trump got elected and how Trump thinks that a country should be run, and not how it shouldn't be run by democracy, but it should be run by dictatorship. Anyway, Putin, meanwhile, is playing to Trump's strengths and weaknesses. The 2 men often commiserate, however, the fake news and deep state are against them. It's not us, Putin reportedly said, told Trump during one recent conversation. It's the subordinates fighting against our relationship. Trump, I know you're not listening, but if you were, the reason we're not friends with Russia is because we want completely opposite things on a world stage. The United States wants democracy, freedom, human rights. Russia wants power. That's it. They just want power. Those 2 things clash because Russia imposes that power on other countries. The United States, before you, has never approved of that. Anyway. All right, let's move on. Let's just stay international with our Trump coverage. Oh, we're actually gonna be international every single one of these. I got a good one though. So let's go. So this week, the World Health Assembly, which is part of the UN, basically had Ecuador come out and they put a resolution out, and the resolution was that government officials for all the participating countries should basically promote breastfeeding and make it so that fake breast formula manufacturers can't lie about the benefits of formula, and they have to basically be honest about it, and they can't tell lies. Well, that was all going very well until the United States came crashing through and basically slammed their foot down, despite the fact that there are decades of research and that the mother's milk is healthiest for children, and countries should strive to limit the inaccurate or misleading marketing of breast milk substitutes. But American officials sought to remove that language, and they called on governments to protect, promote, and support breastfeeding, and another passage that called on policymakers to restrict the promotion of food products that many experts say can have deleterious effects on young children. Well, everyone ignored the United States, and they were going to go ahead and pass the resolution anyway. So what did the United States do? They turned into the damn mafia, and they told Ecuador and a bunch of other countries who are not willing to even put their country, the name of their country out there, and said, if you don't back off this resolution, if you don't vote against it, or just for Ecuador, it was withdraw the resolution, then we're going to take away your aid and money, and we're also going to take away your protection. In the name of capitalism, in the name of infant formula manufacturers, the United States just threatened other countries. It's like the damn Twilight Zone. I don't. I just don't even understand what. Trump apparently can be bought for pennies on the dollar. I would love to know how much money it costs to get him to do something just heinous like this. I mean, I don't think people, and I don't think that Republicans quite understand that when we do something like this, we are harming as the United States, we're harming our station in the international community. You're essentially turning in your capital. You're paying with, here we are, we're telling, we're going to ban, all this stuff, we're going to remove aid and all that. But what we're also paying, we're not just paying with, military support and with aid. We're also paying with our reputation. And Trump, this, like I said, I'm only covering a couple of stories here, but another one that just came out today, right before this stream, was that Trump is going to levy another $200 billion tariffs on another $200 billion of Chinese goods. He's making us look like a fool. He constantly, and I'm not saying that we can't recover, but what I'm saying is that we need to recover. We need to vote this arrogant asshole out of the presidency, and everyone who supports him out of their respective posts. That's every senator, every congressman and congresswoman. They all need to go. This cannot be allowed. We cannot allow ourselves to be irrelevant internationally, or even worse, be a bully. Speaking of such reputation, let me go ahead and just bring this up right here. This week, our good friend, President Trump, is going to go to the United Kingdom, to London. That's going to be on the 13th. Well, you see, in England, they have the country of Brexit, which is something else on its own. They still have, I guess it's the devil who's not your devil. You know what I mean? Like, in the United States, he's our devil, so many people, they're not, nobody in London is attached to Trump. So they created this blimp in protest of him coming to London, and it's the Trump baby blimp, and it's magnificent. If you want to see a picture of it, it's on my Twitter. I'm actually, again, at Real Sam Shannon. It is going to fly over London for 2 hours, I believe, in coordination with the Stop Trump protest. And it's beautiful. Like I said, definitely check it out. Check it out on Twitter, or just Google Trump baby blimp. But it's just magnificent. It's a big fat round baby with the hair and the ugly face of Donald Trump. I couldn't couldn't be prouder. um, I need to get a shirt. I need to get a Trump baby bump shirt. They're like running like $20. I need to find one, but the price has got to be right. All right. So that's our weekly random. To end with the Trump baby blimp, let's go into the Reddit shower thought of the week. This one comes from Illusion Guy. And he says, the number 0 is like a portal from the positive world to the negative world. That's just clever. Speaking of Reddit, this week, if you are not a member of Reddit, Reddit has a piece of the website called Thanos Did Nothing Wrong. And they put together the idea that they were going to ban half of the subreddit, just like Thanos in the Avengers movie, killed half of the sentient life in the universe. And that actually just happened yesterday. But just an interesting fact. All right. Time for the main event. Modern board gaming. Now, you might say to yourself, what is modern board gaming? I mean, I've played board games before. I played Monopoly. I've played Clue. I've played Sorry, Risk. Well, those are not modern board games. Those are old board games. They're kind of low complexity. There's some exceptions of this, but for the most part, low choice. Something like Monopoly, where you just roll, move, decide if you're going to buy it. If you don't buy it, then it goes to auction. The auction process is basically the most complex part of Monopoly, and most people don't even play with it. But something like Sorry, where you just simply roll and move, the game almost plays itself. The only decision is which token to move with that roll. Or something like Battleship, where it's basically a game of memory and shooting in the dark. It's just these games where there's not much to them. People play them because they love board games, they love gaming, and they're raised on them, so everybody plays them. Well, recently, kind of something called modern board gaming is kind of a movement I would be curious to know how big the industry is. But board gaming has kind of grown into something completely different. Just like video games have grown from the 8-bit, which that being said, I love the 8-bit on the regular NES or on the Atari, which is even less than 8-bit, has grown from that all the way to PlayStation and the PC and Xbox One and all that. The complexity and the quality of those games. I mean, from simplicity to complexity. It's pretty hard to argue that the amount of work that it took to pull off, Witcher 3 or Last of Us or any of those. It's much more complex. Anyway, modern board games have up to a total of, right now, on the premier modern board gaming or just board game website in general is called BoardGameGeek.com, and they define 51 different mechanics. Now, these mechanics are often mixed and matched to create a board game. And if you want to check all those out, you can just go to BoardGameGeek.com. I'm going to cover a few of them today and go into kind of some of the types of games and how they've kind of been updated as well. We'll actually start. We're going to start with the party games. In the past, you have something similar to like Trivial Pursuit, Cranium, Categories, and while those games are fine, they've just kind of been replaced. There's just better things out there now. There's a game called Codenames, where basically what you do is you line up put out a thing of cards face up, and you have two teams, and one team is red and one team is blue, and then each team has a bunch of spies, and another team, and then each team has spies and a leader, and the leader is trying to guide the spies to pick the correct cards by saying one word. They're only allowed to say one word, and the word can't be the word on anything on the card. First person to guess all correctly wins, or if they guess there's a bomb card kind of. So code names: Dixit, the Resistance, which is a whole nother brand of of hidden roles where you're trying to. There's a Resistance and there's Resistance Avalon. I prefer the Avalon version. It's the medieval version, but it has a couple of additional roles. But like I said, it's a hidden roles game. There's one person who's basically there's a Merlin, and then there's a bunch of bad guys, and the bad guys are trying to make these missions fail, and Merlin is trying to lead everybody to get that he knows who the bad guys are and nobody else does, but he's trying to lead the good guys to vote against the bad guys without revealing himself, because if it doesn't at the end of the game, it won't matter if the bad guys, aren't successful in failing any missions if they can guess who Merlin is. If they kill Merlin, then they win. So that's a lot of fun. That's a 5-player game. All of these I recommend checking them out. Like I said, these are relatively simple but fun games with interesting decisions, which is kind of it's a far cry from where we were. Trivial Pursuit's fun, but somewhat arbitrary. Scattergories it's a fun game. It was one of my favorites growing up. But there's so many more options now. That's another piece, is just the vast options. And you can get these games like these party games specifically, you can get them some of them at Walmart, you can get them on Amazon. There's a website called CoolStuffIncorporated.com, where if you're willing to spend $100, they have the best prices. No one can beat them. There's also, you should have like a local board gaming store, and they're a little more pricey, but because you go there, you can help them stay open. It's a big movement because you can go there and play games with people. It can become kind of a meetup spot for you. But I recommend for party games, Codenames, Dixit, the Resistance Avalon, Love Letter, and obviously you probably heard of Cards Against Humanity. That one's a little more like the older games, but it is a crowd pleaser. So party games, and I mean, I've been able to get people to play party games who don't even like to play any type of game. People who don't play video games, don't play complex strategy games, anything, but these are kind of just, they're more about who you're playing with. They're more about icebreakers. They're more just get to know each other type of games, and it's a lot of fun, even for the non-gamers. So if you are a gamer, if we're gonna get deeper into this, and there's gonna be a lot of strategy games, a lot of meaty games. If that's the type of thing you like, get ready to have stuff for you. But if you have friends who aren't like that, which I have lots of them, it's like me and my mom were like the main two gamers in my whole family and my wife's family. Nobody else likes to play games or watch games or do any gaming. But I can get my wife's family to play party games. So they're icebreakers. They're fun to play. Yeah, I definitely recommend checking out just any of those. Codenames, Dixit, The Resistance Avalon, Love Letter. Love Letter is like a 5 to 10 minute game. Just quick. It's a little deck of 9 or 10 cards. Hidden roles. Everyone's trying to find the queen. It's a fun one. Simple. All these are simple. All right, get into a little bit more of the meat though. There's something called Euro games. Now, you might be familiar with, you might have played a Euro game and not even know it. The Euro game that kind of started it all was Settlers of Catan. Now, Settlers of Catan now has not a million, 5 or 6 different expansions. And, once you get into those expansions, the game kind of gets better. I'm actually not a fan of Settlers of Catan anymore. The rolling of the dice, and that's how you get your resources, feels very arbitrary. And you can just lose the game because the dice didn't go your way, which is a theme that you see kind of in the older games like Risk or Monopoly, even things like Clue. There's a lot of what we call RNG, which is random chance or random number generation. These old board games had a lot of that, and Settlers of Catan did too. But there's a lot of other Euro games that don't. There's actually a game, and this is, I kind of have these, I got 4 games, and I'll kind of put them in easy, medium, and complex. But I'm going to do one of the complex ones first because there's a game called Terra Mystica. It's kind of Settlers of Catan if Settlers of Catan was really good. It's a better Settlers of Catan. But it is a more complex game. The first game is going to take about an hour to learn. But it has a great cutout in the game and in the game box that actually explains how the entire game works. So if you like Settlers of Catan and you want something a little more complex, something a little less random, I definitely recommend Terra Mystica. But to go down, to go to a game of Euro that's a little bit easier, there's things like Castles of Burgundy. Castles of Burgundy is one of the best 2-player games that I know. It's super simple, super fun. I recommend it. That's another thing that's really great about modern board gaming is there are games of every type for every player count. Like I told you earlier, my mom and I are really the only 2 people in my family who like to play board games. I can convince my wife to play sometimes. But generally speaking, that's a 2-player experience for me. So if you see behind me, I actually have a lot of board games on that shelf. And I try to kind of cater to those 2-player games. And Castles of Burgundy is probably one of the best 2-player games there is. And one of the better, more simpler Euro games. If you want to step up from Castles of Burgundy, I recommend Trajan. And then a step up even from those would be back into that complex tier would be Agricola, which is still probably, people have argued that Caverna, which is kind of a more vast version of Agricola, is better. A huge fan of Agricola. It's got so many different things going on, and it really does, in my opinion, simulate as best as possible a board game can farming and living on a farm. And you grow pumpkins and you grow wheat and you grow sheep and cows. Sheep and cows. Is that just and pigs? Sorry, sheep, cows, and pigs. And you get kind of graded. You get points based on how, if you kind of cover everything, you get more points. But it's that's a very complex game, but very fun. It's still in the Euro game, but I didn't even define Euro games. Sorry, Euro games are games that are built around points and action taking rather than head-to-head combat. Like a game like Risk was build up an army and then try to take over somebody else's land by attacking them through dice rolling, and whoever rolled their dice the best, at the end of the day, whatever luck decided, you moved in. Euro games have none of that. You can't attack anybody. You can't take over their land. It's more about resource denial and moving onto their space and trying to, in Agricola specifically, there are action spaces, and every round you go around in order, placing a token and taking an action. Now, generally speaking, once one person takes one of the actions, nobody else can take that action. So, and that action might be like, okay, get a cow. Well, one person got to get that cow. Nobody else gets a cow. Nobody else can get cows this round. And then at the end of a round, it all get cleaned off, and we reset, and you can actually influence where you go in order. So there's a spot that actually says go first. So you're not you can sort of waste an action, but next round you get to pick whatever you want. But yeah, Euro games, they're more about strategy, and there's less headbutting, but a lot of like competition still. I thoroughly recommend. Terra Mystica is probably my favorite of that genre, but again, there's so many. I mean, probably about 40 to 50% of those games back there are Euro games. The next section, the next type of game I wanted to cover was the war game. So this is in the spirit of Risk. If you're not familiar with it, Risk is exactly what I just defined earlier. It was, get as many armies as possible and take over the world. And when you ran into somebody else, you just rolled dice. Whoever rolled the best and killed the most people's stuff, and they take over, or they could retreat and take over. And then the more stuff you own, the more resources you get. But sometimes you got spread out, and but it was just a roll off. It was whatever the dice gave you. Well, war games in modern board gaming are not that lame. Risk always, at the end of the day, and there's still some of this in war games now. You get so angry. But I felt like one of the main reasons you got angry is it didn't feel fair. It didn't feel fair when the dice didn't go your way. You could play as great as possible, but you could go up, have 10 armies, and go up against somebody's 2 armies and just lose. Well, war games nowadays are less like that. They're now a little more complex. Stuff like there's a game called Blood Rage, and you're now in the North. It's a Norse themed war game, and you get different types of armies, and it's all around Ragnarok, and it's one of the easier ones, but it's a lot of fun. But one of my personal favorites is it's a little denser, but there's something called Kemet, and it's Egyptian themed, and it's kind of a combo Euro and combo Euro war game, but you can basically get these tiles and get these get the powers of the gods. There's like multiple temples, and the more temples you control, the more victory points you get. And it's back to that victory point winnings, which is how you win in a Euro game. But it's a lot of fun. There's even a Game of Thrones board game out there, and it's all about betrayal and working together. If you've ever played Diplomacy, which most of you I would assume have not, it's kind of a better version of Diplomacy though, where you're making deals with each other to help each other take over different pieces of land, and then all the action then happens at the exact same time, and then you have no idea if this person actually supported you or if they didn't. You just find out that they did or didn't when all the actions happen. So if you like the Game of Thrones books or the Game of Thrones movies, show, I definitely, and you have friends who do and who would love to backstab each other and love to fight with each other and against each other, I recommend the Game of Thrones board game. Very well put together board game. Kind of a medium complexity. You are going to be learning, especially. I wouldn't recommend it as your first board game. I'd go off to the party games first, or one of the for Blood Rage for an easier game, kind of expensive but easier game. And then go even more complex in war games. There's a Lord of the Rings war game called War of the Ring, and it's probably one of the most I mean, it's amazing how accurate it is to the books and to the movies for Lord of the Rings. It is the ability to put that into a board game, and where the the good guys are trying to destroy the ring and they're weaker than the bad guys, but so they're trying to rush the ring as fast as possible to Mount Doom before the bad guys kind of swell up and just take over the entire land. Um, I played it one time with my buddy. It was actually our first time playing each, and I was Mordor and he was the Free People, and he tried to, as the Free People, overwhelm me as Mordor, and it didn't focus on getting the ring, and ended up not working out for him, and I ended up winning because that's generally speaking not the just like in the movies and in the books. That's not how you win. That's not how the Free People were ever going to win by strength of arm. They had to destroy the ring, and this board game kind of does a fantastic job of um, representing that. I mean, it's a fantastic board game. But the final type of board game, then I want to get into some of the mechanics that I mentioned earlier. One of the in my opinion, brand new types of board games that's out is a cooperative game, and this is where players work together to defeat the game rather than try to defeat each other. They basically it's kind of like having an AI for a board game, but it's the AI is a deck of cards that the board game designers created. Um, and these games are perfect. Like I love playing these with my wife because, quite frankly, I'm a little better at board games than she is. I'm better at gaming. That's one of the things I love to do. Um, but so cooperative board games. Again, I'm going to give you kind of an easy, medium, and advanced. One of the easier ones is something called Mysterium, and Mysterium is a great game with beautiful art, and I definitely recommend checking out. But my first experience into the co-op was a game called Pandemic, and this is a board game where you are fighting a pandemic. There are, I believe, 4 different diseases: red, blue, yellow and black, that you are fighting against, that are trying to spread across the globe and consume the world, and it's just fantastic because you're the doctors, you're trying to discover the cures before they can do this, trying to treat the cities as you go, and that is, I mean, it's I'm glad it was my first. I've played it a lot now, so I'm actually really good at it. And kind of eventually, if you play it enough and you play it, you'll kind of figure out the pattern and figure out. There's not really a pattern, but kind of the best way to go about all the actions. But that's why they released something called Pandemic Legacy Season 1, and they take it and they put it in something called a legacy board game. So if you play one game and you do really well, the next game will probably be easier, and the things change on the board game. Things become harder. Cities get blacked out. You get new cards. The game changes. I think it's 17 plays or something like that. Might have been 20. But the game changes every single round depending on how well you do it, how well you protect the world. And there's season 1 and season 2. But season 1 is particularly fantastic. So I recommend starting, if you want to go into the co-op world, go ahead and start with Pandemic. And then once you've kind of mastered that, go ahead and get Pandemic Legacy Season 1. And the legacy boarding, there aren't very many of them out there yet, but Pandemic Legacy is an amazing legacy board game. And that, I think, is one of the coolest things that's come out of modern board gaming in general, is these legacy board games where you're actually putting stickers on the board. I just remember growing up, like, as a board game, you don't want to do anything to the board game, and you don't want to change anything, don't write on it, and here it is telling you to do that because the rules are going to change for the next round. You'll get new rules, you'll get new cards, you'll get new powers, you'll get all these things, and it's a pretty fascinating board game. So I thoroughly recommend it. I'd go Pandemic, play through that, get good at it, and then go Pandemic Legacy. Um, and again, that's kind of a more, I say it's more advanced, but it is slightly more advanced than regular Pandemic, but it's because it introduces um, that legacy mechanic, which if you're not familiar with the base game of Pandemic, might be a little unwieldy for you. Another more advanced co-op game is something called Space Alert, and Space Alert is where you're not on the Starship Enterprise because this isn't a Star Trek themed board game, but you might as well be on the Star Trek Enterprise as you are flying through space and aliens are attacking you, and it's a timed game where you have to react every single round to these new threats, and you have to put shields up, you have to shoot at them, and you're doing this with 4 people, and you're coordinating because you only have so much time and so many movements. It is actually my personal favorite co-op game, but it can be a little rough. Um, I said it's like I said, I put it into advanced. It's definitely the best when you have 4 people who want to play with you and who like co-op games. Um, yeah, I would recommend it. Just get a gaming group, and we're gonna get there. All right, now into the mechanics. I want to introduce 5. Well, let me see. Co-op might have been one of my mechanics. Yeah, 1, 2, 3. 3 more mechanics. First is deck building, and this is where you start with a deck of cards, and as the game progresses, you constantly add and remove cards from your deck. And over time, you're going to build decks and pools that are more and more specialized towards some purpose, typically claiming victory objectives or something like that. Deck and with these games, deck building may be the central mechanism, but there's going to have or just be one of the larger system. It's the you're able to build your own game as you go. They don't tell you you have to play like this. You can try out different strategies. You can get different cards every time. And some of them are just competitive games you're playing against each other. Some of them you're playing against like the board or something like that. There's a Lord of the Rings card game that's actually a co-op deck builder. And you're getting new cards and you're trying to defeat the deck while your deck is growing and changing. But the easiest if I was you, if you want to get into deck building, I would start with Dominion. There are multiple expansions for Dominion. Dominion has been very successful. It's a fun game. It's easy. It kind of eventually gets kind of rote. It was fun the first. I think it was Dominion was my first modern board game. And obviously it was good enough, I guess, other than Settlers Catan, but it was good enough because it did actually get me hooked. If the game actually ever gets stale for you, you can actually just get yourself one of the mini expansions, Dominion Intrigue. I think there's 4 or 5 of them now. But if you want to go a little more complex, there's something called the Arkham Horror card game. Even more complex, there's Mage Knight and Food Chain Magnate. Food Chain Magnate, like the Mage Knight and Food Chain Magnate combine deck building with multiple other mechanisms. Mage Knight's going to be kind of a campaign style deck builder where you have a map and you're going out and trying to defeat monsters. It's kind of an RPG, which is just amazing as a deck building game. Where Food Chain Magnate is a competitive Euro game where you're trying to build up this food chain and dominate soft drinks or dominate burgers and all this kind of thing. Both of those are definitely on the complex side. I would recommend getting into Dominion if you find that you like Dominion or something like that, and you're interested in an RPG style game. Or then go ahead and hop into Mage Knight. Mage Knight is a solo. I think it goes up to 4 players, but like it's not recommended to go up past like 2 because it's a very long game even for 1 player. For the next one is drafting. This is kind of again not deck building, but still back to cards. And what happens in a drafting game is you are dealt dealt a hand of cards. You look at your hand, you might have 7 cards. You're going to take one of them, put it face down in front of you, and you're going to pass your hand to the person to your right or left, depending on which way your guys are going. And then that person and somebody else on the opposite side is going to hand you their 6 cards. You're going to take one, pass it, and you're going to go all the way around until you have 7 cards face down in front of you. These are just fun games. They're fun. There are a lot of simple games in this. There's something called Sushi Go, and it's a set collection game. And you got really cute art. I've got it actually back there. There's Seven Wonders Duel, which is a 2-player version of Seven Wonders. You might even have heard of Seven Wonders. It's one of the more popular. It's kind of older now amongst the modern board games. But I think it's again set collection with some different mechanics happening with the different cards, and if you get certain amounts, you get certain victory points. But yeah, drafting it's a very interesting mechanic. A lot of it happens in for set collection, but there are many other. I mean, like I said, Board Game Geek draft. If you want, you can just go to Board Game Geek, look up the mechanic drafting, and it give you a whole list of games. The last mechanic that I wanted to cover was kind of one of the more fascinating ones, and I think it existed in the past to some degree, but it's kind of just fascinating now. It's it's a mechanic called variable player powers, and that's where everybody is sort of playing their own game. You're playing against each other, but everyone has different powers and sometimes different goals. Like I said before, when that game Codenames, you have one side of the board, you have the team members who are trying to be the ones who guess the cards, while you have the leaders who are trying to help them guess the cards. That's a completely different experience. If you're the leader, you're doing one thing, and the entire team is depending on you to be able to kind of give really good hints. And then, or you could be on the team where you are trying to make the good guesses. It kind of like Pictionary. It's another sort of variable player powers, but kind of depends a little too much on other people's ability to draw, which if that's for me, that's a very bad thing because I can't draw at all. But Codenames is kind of an easy party game version of this, but there's other things like Scythe, kind of a medium. This is kind of a war game, and it's definitely an area control game, but every single faction has different powers. Terra Mystica, the Euro game that I mentioned that was very complex, but it was a better version of Settlers of Catan. I think it's got 24. I think there's 12 cards and there's one on each side. There are 24, or it might be 20. 20 to 24 different factions, and they each have different powers and abilities and specialties. And so it just gives you every single game you play of these variable power games can be completely different, especially something like Terra Mystica, where you can play. I mean, if you get Terra Mystica and its expansion, I think there's another expansion coming out. I mean, you can play a different faction every single time and have different powers, different goals every single time. And it just feels like infinite variation, which is, I don't know, just fantastic when it comes to board games. It keeps games from getting stale. It's one of the reasons Terra Mystica is one of my favorites. But now I wanted to move on to the communities, because while you may not have known about board gaming, you might even know about board gaming. But if you don't, if you're familiar with Reddit has a subreddit called Board Games. If you just type into Google, you type in r/space board games, it's going to bring up the subreddit for board games. And if you have any questions about board games, these people love board games and would love to help you. The same thing kind of goes kind of a little less. I feel like our board games is kind of more introductory. Board Game Geek is the #1 board game community in the world. Um, every single board game that exists practically is on here. It's been rated. It's, the type of mechanics, the how many people, like, how board games say, oh, this is a 2 to 5 player game. Well, people have actually gone on here and said, no, it's really the best when you play with 3 people. And usually it takes about this long per person. And these are people's actual experiences instead of just what they slap on a box. Which is a little more accurate now for modern board games. Some of the older board games were not. Um, the third, the third community I wanted to mention was Meetup.com. Meetup.com is not just board games. Meetup.com is a little bit of everything. But if you don't have anyone to play board games with, don't be dismayed. Now, if you live in the middle of nowhere, Montana, there may not be anybody for you. However, if you're, I'm south of Atlanta. I don't live in Atlanta proper or in North Atlanta where there are it's a lot more populous. If I lived up there, there'd be local board game stores for me to play anywhere I want. Brick and mortars everywhere where I could play. But there is a meetup near where I live, and for a long time I used to go to it. It's now my hours at work shifted, so now it's harder for me to go. But there's probably one nearby for you is kind of where I'm going with this. And kind of go along with that, there are also conventions where people get together and go play board games. If you ever go to an Atlanta board game convention, you might be able to meet me because I love board games and I go to them somewhat frequently. The third and final piece of this is if you want to get familiar with a board game without actually having to play it, or before you go to a convention or a meetup or whatever, there are plenty of places that do board game reviews or even walkthroughs and playthroughs. Will Wheaton of Star Trek fame worked with Geek and Sundry, which is a YouTube channel, and he did something called Tabletop, and he did 4 seasons of Tabletop. And this is a very well-produced experience where Will Wheaton and somewhat minor celebrities, sometimes a little more, little bigger celebrities, get together and just play a board game through. And they explain the rules. It's a really, I've watched I watched every single one of them. It's a really great introduction to board gaming. They play generally, less complex games that are more friendly to the cameras. But that is Tabletop on YouTube. Another really great board game review would be Shut Up and Sit Down. It's some English blokes who just have created their own board game channel, and they just do really my favorite. They do written reviews, but they do a lot of great video reviews as well that are both creative but also pretty informative. I find that my personal board game tastes kind of line up with theirs. You may not find that, but I definitely recommend checking them out. Another one, this is one of the bigger reviewers, and that they have their own convention now, and that's Dice Tower, and that's dicetower.com. They review basically every board game that comes out. If you want to find out, if you want to just kind of an overview and kind of their review of this game and their opinions, then like I said, they basically review every major board game that comes out. Dice Tower, the YouTube, they have their own YouTube channel, but they also have their own website and their own convention. It's pretty big, and I recommend it. It's still very informative, pretty good. There's pretty good community as well. And another game walkthrough. There's a couple of these on YouTube. You can just look up game walkthroughs, but one of the better ones is Watch It Played. And they do a pretty thorough job in explaining board games. But yeah, that's kind of the Too Much to Say podcast introduction to modern board gaming. There's a lot more than anything that I mean, I mentioned probably about a dozen to a dozen and a half games, but there are hundreds, probably thousands of games of every type, fashion, and taste. I mean, heck, I didn't even mention all the games that are behind me. Um, I did mention a lot of them because those are the ones that I'm familiar with. Um, but there are games for every age group, every taste. I mean, I play game. I have a 3-year-old and a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old, and we're already playing board games. I got a game called Rampage where you play as a dragon and you not it. It's a game that they basically based it off of um, the old what's it called? Not video game, but arcade game. There we are. Arcade game Rampage, where you play as like a monster and you destroy buildings and you just eat people and all this thing, and they just have a fantastic time knocking these towers down and eating the people. And there's all sorts of things. There's tons of games for little kids. You don't have to suffer as a parent. If you're a parent, you don't have to suffer anymore playing these awful games like Sorry or Monopoly. You can get games with real decisions. There's a game called Patchwork where you're just building this quilt, and it's kind of like Tetris meets a board game, and you have to you know you buy the tiles and you pick where they go, and the person with the most coverage and most buttons wins the game. Kind of teaches kids economics. I mean, this modern board game is really cool, and there's lots of crowd-funded board games. I mean, board gaming is growing. Just go to boardgamebeat.com, go to our board games on Reddit, and just check it out. I mean, there's so much out there. Um, but yeah, that's basically all I have to say about it for now. If you have any questions for me about it, go. I'm on Twitter at realsamshannon at realsamshannon. You can also you can DM me on Twitter. You can just straight up tweet me, or if you want, I'm also available. I'm here on Twitch.tv. After the podcast, we're gonna do a little quick Q&A. So if you have questions there, definitely feel free. But yeah, and also if you're listening on the podcast, we are definitely available on all. We're on Spotify, iTunes, Stitcher, everywhere where podcasts can be found. I'd appreciate it if you give us a follow, like, or subscribe. Just trying to if you support what we do, that'd be very much appreciated. But you just listen is appreciated, and I hope you have a great rest of your week. We'll be back Saturday, 8:30, twitch.tv/Hector Meow. We'll be live again covering the World Cup, covering probably more in NBA free agency, just all the sports stuff that's happened this past week. And then we'll be back again next week, Tuesday at 8:30 on twitch.tv/Hector Meow with another episode of the kind of the culture politics version of Too Much to Say. But again, I appreciate it, and you have a great week. But if you have any questions for me, yeah, feel free. If you want to know anything about board gaming, I can either answer it or probably help you find the correct answer. So, if you're still with us. But while I'm waiting, I'm going to go ahead and get this thing uploaded. Get the podcast out. Well, looks like we're all alone, so I'm just gonna go ahead and that'll be it for the night. I appreciate you listening, and like I said, please follow, like, subscribe.